So I'm going to show you some basic Illustrator skills and then some skills in Illustrator that will help you with your type design project specifically. I have outlined over on the right hand side, I've given myself a little note out here in the artboard area of the Illustrator document, so we're just going to go through this whole checklist. So this is a new Adobe Illustrator document. I just used the defaults. It's defaulting to US letter size, landscape orientation. And the first thing I want to do is I want to place my scan on a layer. So you go to File, Place. You find your scanned artwork for your final drawing, and you place it. You can move this to where you need it to be. And what I highly recommend doing is setting this to be your scan layer. I'm a big fan of layers in Illustrator. Here is the layers palette. In case you are not familiar with layers, layers are like endless sheets of completely transparent tracing paper. So you can constantly put a new layer, build a new layer, you can move layers around. They are a very, very useful tool in digital design. So what I recommend doing is bringing up your layers palette. You can see that when I have this scan, this placed scan selected, its selection border is blue. It's because it's on layer 1, which is blue. You can change the color of a layer if you want. So if I made this green, suddenly that selection outline becomes green. That becomes green, and I can rename it. So I'm going to call this scan. I'm going to call it scan 01, and you'll see why. You will only be placing one scan. I'm going to probably place a few different ones over the course of this demo. So that's why I'm calling it scan 1. And then I'm going to lock it. So that once a layer is locked, it means you cannot interact with it. I can't do anything with that layer. Now this is a very good thing when you're doing what we want to do, which is tracing over a piece of art and then hiding it. So if I want to actually do some work in Illustrator, I need to create a new layer. And I'm going to call this art. And I'm going to change this so that that has the light blue. Alright, so that is placing a scan. And you'll notice now I can't interact with my checklist because my checklist is on the scan layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to call that checklist. And you can see that when I have this piece of text selected in my layers palette, I have this little green dot next to the scan 01 layer that shows me which layer what I have selected is on. And you can also see the selection outline is green to match the color of that layer. Well, I can just grab this, move it up to the checklist layer. There it goes. Now I can lock my scan layer again, and I can interact with my checklist. Alright, so I have placed the scan, told you about managing layers. let's talk about pulling guidelines. If you go to View, Rulers, Show Rulers, you will get rulers along the top and left-hand side of your document. If you touch the ruler and pull down, holding down the mouse button the whole time, you can pull a guideline down. So I pulled one down to be my baseline, I pulled one over to be my left-hand side of this artwork, pulled one to be my right-hand side, and I'm going to pull one down to be my X height. Now, if we zoom in, zooming is very simple. You see this up here. This tells you what % you're zoomed in at. The key commands for zooming are very useful. If you do Command minus, it's zoom out. Command plus is zoom in. Command 0 is fit the whole document to the screen. No matter how large your document is, it will just put the whole thing on the screen. And Command 1 is show it at 100% size. Alright, so I zoom in, and I can see an issue with my guidelines. I sort of screwed up the last minute. My baseline guideline is it's high. So I want to just grab the guideline and move it. Well, it's not letting me. It's not letting me touch anything. What's going on? You go to View, Guides. It defaults to locking the guides. And this is a good thing because you want your guides to generally be locked. Generally, when you put a guideline down, you want it to stay in place and you want to be able to move your art around without changing the guidelines. But when you want to unlock a guideline, you go down here. Now I can move this guideline around to my heart's content. I'm actually going to pull a second guideline. You can see that in this particular design, the stem of the N is much lower than the overshoot of this six-sided letter. So I'm going to actually give myself a range here. And this is where you start seeing just how imprecise your drawings might be. You know, things all looked pretty much the same height, but once I start pulling guidelines, I can see, well, my X height is all over the place. Things aren't quite all on the same baseline. These are all things that you should fix and update in this project when you are working digitally. One of the great things about working digitally is that you can fix something without having to completely redo it, like you need to with a pencil or a marker drawing. So there are my guidelines. I'm going to go back to locking them. So now I cannot move these guidelines around. Now the other thing is, excuse me, the other thing is I gave you guys the instruction that the artboard should be only slightly larger than the art. It should be an inch, should have an inch margin on the top, left and right, 1.25 inches on the bottom. And you may be wondering what is an artboard, or you may know what an artboard is, but you're not sure how to change the size. So I'm just going to take it from the top. This white document that we are working on, this is the artboard. This gray background, this is the workspace. A good analogy is that the workspace is like the top of a physical desk, and that the artboard is like the piece of paper on the desk. You can have all kinds of stuff on the desk that is not on the paper, and if you pick up that paper and carry it away, then only what is on the paper will stay with the paper. It's the same way with an artboard and a workspace, and that's why I put my checklist out here in the workspace. Once I print this document or make a PDF, this checklist will not appear. because it's not on the artboard. It's just off in the workspace. It's off on the desk, not on the paper. I defaulted to using a US letter size paper, but I want to instead change my artboard size. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull some guides that match our specifications. I'm going to draw myself a box that is 1 inch square. And I'm going to pull some guides down. So that guide is 1 inch above the top of my stem here. This guide is 1 inch to the left of the N. Let's grab this box again and use it to pull over another guideline. This box is 1 inch to the right of the right-hand side. And now I'm going to bring this down here. I'm going to make my box in height 1.25 inches tall, and use this to bring down my bottom guideline, and I can just delete that box. So the rectangle indicated by these guidelines is what I want to set my artboard to. This, I'm going to zoom out real quickly. This is the artboard tool. When I click it, you can see suddenly I have crop marks in all four corners. The edge of my artboard becomes a dotted line. And I can grab and move the corners of the artboard to my heart's content. Okay, so now my artboard, and then when I am done, I have the artboard to the size and position that I want it. Just go back to using the regular arrow selection tool. And now my artboard is the actual size that I want it to be. It's much smaller than a sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper. That's okay, that's what I want. This is very useful when you're designing logos or any other pieces of art that have a specific size. You can make the artboard the exact size you need. They don't necessarily have to just be floating on a piece of paper scaled to your printer. So that is pulling guides and resizing the artboard. So my next Illustrator tip is save early, save often. You may notice up here my document is Untitled 1, and there's a little asterisk next to it. It means that it hasn't been saved since the last change. And the fact that it's called Untitled 1 tells me that it's never been saved. This is poor practice. There's nothing worse than doing a bunch of work on a document, spending an hour or two working on something, and then suddenly your power goes out or your software crashes and it hasn't been saved and you've lost a bunch of work. You should just get in the habit of saving very early on and then constantly hitting Command-S on your keyboard to save it. As you go. So I'm going to call it Project 3. And my last name and first name. This is how I would like you to, actually, sorry, I'm going to call it Type 1, Project 3, and then last name, first initial. This is how I'd like you to save all electronic documents for this class. It will help me find your files when you're handing in electronic files. When I have a bunch of projects just called type project or type or untitled 1, untitled 2. I have no idea who did it. I have no idea which project it is. I have no idea which semester it is. So including the name of the course, the project number, and your name tells me all of that before I even have to open it up. All right, and you hit save. The saving options. This is important if you're going to be moving between computers. I'm on Illustrator CS6. There is a newer version of Illustrator, which is CC or Creative Cloud. Many of you may have Creative Cloud. You can see that I can save all the way down to Illustrator 3 version, which is from sometime in the 90s. Having all these options to save to different levels is very important because software is never forwards compatible. It can be backwards compatible, but it's never forwards compatible. So since I have CS6, that means I can open up any files older than up to and including CS6. CS5 files, no problem. But CS4, CS3, CS2, no problem. If somebody gives me a CC or Creative Cloud file, I'm going to have trouble opening it because it's a newer version. So let's say you're working on a school computer and it has CS6 or it has Creative Cloud, and you know at home you're actually working with a much older version of Illustrator. You're working with CS3. So at this point, when you get to the save, you want to save it as CS3. If you're not sure how old it is, go for the oldest version that it possibly could be, because you remember, if you have Illustrator CS2 to CS2, CS3 is too new. You know, it's always backwards compatible, it's never forwards compatible. So think about what the oldest it could be is and save to that. I do not have that problem. I'm just going to be working on my own computer with this file, so I'm not going to worry about it. That is an issue if you're going between school computers and a home computer, or between two different home computers with different versions of the software installed. All right, saved. And now you can see my file name is up here in the header bar of the document. So that is save early, and the save often, just as you're working, remember to save. I just do Command S on the keyboard. Just get in the habit of whenever you complete something major, hit Command S. Whenever you get up from your seat, hit Command S. Just get in the habit of saving all the time. And the last part of our document management part will be printing with crops and page info. Alright, so this is going to be important when you're printing this document. Now, I haven't done any artwork yet, so in a way I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but this seems like a good time to talk about it because it's really a document management skill. So when you're printing, I have my printer set up, you go to Marks and Bleed, and you turn on trim marks. You can see in my preview here, I got these little trim marks at all four corners of my document. And you turn on page information, and you can see that that little smudge appeared in my preview. Now, it's too small to see what that is, but that is actually the file name and the date and time of its printing. This becomes very, very useful when you are printing multiple copies because it's a built-in check. If you have a whole pile of papers and they get out of order, and it can be very hard to figure out which one is the most recent one. If you have printed with page information on, then you know which one is the most recent one because it's right there. You may be able to hear my printer chunking away in the background there. And the crop marks let you know where the edge of the document is, where the edge of your artboard is versus the edge of the paper. Also very important when you're dealing with something that's a different size from your paper. So let's mark that off the checklist, and let's get down to the actual nuts and bolts of our project. So I want to draw these letters in Illustrator. I'm going to go through a few different methods here in my tracing art part. I'm going to make that a second video, so watch the second video for everything on this part of the checklist.